section 2, the focus point for today's part is called Path to Global Leader. So what kind of person did your parents want, right? What kind of person do your parents want us to be? What kind of person does Ocean Providence need? And am I that person? You know, are you, right? So that is the question. So let's get into it and let's see. Okay, so as usual, it's like, you know, these presentations are filled with your parents' words. It's almost like a hundoke. So, but it will not be that long, just to say. Okay, so from Godswell and the Ocean, he said, the ocean has everything to do with the future. Don't you know that? You have to become interested in the ocean, or otherwise you will just disappear into history. In the future, the qualification for leadership will be to know about the ocean. So, you know, what kind of leader, right, did your father hope for? I mean, from this words that he said, you can kind of see, right, what kind of future leader he wanted to see. And why did he say we need to know about the ocean, right? So first of all, why did he say that, right? That is also a question. So as usual, in this these presentations, we use these books, right? Of course, his autobiography, your father's autobiography, Pacific Rim Providence in Chonsongyeon, Champamogyeon Book 10, Godswell on the Ocean, and these speeches. So these are such good materials when you're really interested in Ocean Providence. So please go ahead and use this as hundoke materials. But in this specific presentation, you know, the title is Path to Global Leader. So we are concentrated on this specific topic. And then we're going to talk about 3 points today. First of all, what is the current situation of the youth of the world? Because when we talk about the leader, right, future leader, you know, us or even younger people, we need to know what the current situation is with the youth today, right? And also number 2, what is what is a global leader? What is a leader that your father hoped to see in our movement, right? And number 3, what kind of person is actually, after we know what the global leader is, right? Then what kind of person is the leader in the ocean era that your father wished for? So we're gonna, you know, kind of focus on to, you know, understanding what a global leader that your father wanted, and then relate that to the Ocean Providence specifically, and then what kind of person is actually necessary in today's world right now, right? And what kind of person we need to become. So the first section. Okay, so what is happening to the youth of today globally? So we're just gonna see some trends and statistics and things like that to see what basically is happening with the youth today. So let's see. Of course, you know, we're ravaged by materialism. You know, social media, SNS, a lot of articles are coming up these days, you know, of the harmful effects of social media, SNS. Of course, sexual immorality is a problem. And many young people are actually pessimistic for the future, right? A lot of people don't feel hope or don't have big visions or don't feel motivated, you know, to do big things. Some do, but the trend shows otherwise. And also, it's, you know, some statistics showing that today's, you know, developed nations youth, they really lack empathy for less fortunate people. It's more like I'm the victim here, you know, victim mentality, right? Whatever the word is today, right? So lack of compassion towards others, right? I am the most suffering one here, you know what I mean? So, and then of course there is a problem of mental illness, suicide, narcissism. So these things are some of the kind of the key words, right, in today's youth, especially in the developed nations. So what is the global issues and mental state of the youth? And first of all, right, whatever is happening in the world, the point here is that whatever is happening in the world, whatever is on the news today, actually affect the mental state of our youth. So let's see what that means, right? So in today's world, the internet and SNS connect people's information and mental state like never before, affecting each other. It's like an information highway that connects everybody's brains together, almost, right? And everybody's mental state is affected by each other's mental state, you know? So in particular, the youth who use the social media platforms more than other generations, right, youth of today, like my daughters, always on TikTok or like whatever, right? YouTube or whatever, and social media, Instagram and things like that. These youth, never before this kind of thing happened, right, in human history. So, the youth who use these social media platforms like eating and breathing, right? They are affected by the mental state of the adults of the world who's generating these stories, generating these happenings in the world, right? And even without understanding the full extent of the issues, they are still affected, the youth, right? So the global issues, first of all, we always hear about like climate change or like, so many natural disasters are happening, hunger, war, Ukraine, and things like that. Gas prices are up, or like racism, things like that. All these issues, right? Even though even if the youth doesn't clearly understand the issue, they get clearly affected, right? So the mental state, you see like the tendency in the world today, like see a lot of negative, news and articles and things like that. So, global issues affect the world's overall mental state, right? And this affects today's youth's mental health because they are completely connected to the internet and they are exposed, whether or not, if they understand or not, they are exposed to these information and the mental state of the world. So the current world is plagued by, poverty, starvation, claims of climate change, right? And refugee problems and racism and all these things coming up all the time on the news, right? So in order to resolve this, there's no hope unless the youth of today grow up to become the people who can solve these global issues in the future, right? We have to raise the current youth, I'm kind of like not in the youth category anymore, but like anybody who's younger than me, I guess, right? We have to raise all these young people to become the leaders of tomorrow, right? If we don't raise them properly, what's going to happen to the world today, right? That is the concern for a lot of adults these days, right? So let us first see what the actual situation is with these youth, right? By looking at some data like current world situation, world's mental state, and mental state of the youth of today. So we're going to look at some of the data. Hopefully you're not bored by this kind of stuff, but it is interesting to see. So 3 physical challenges humanity presented by Truffaut. So first of all, what did Truffaut say about what are the most challenging things about humanity today? So Truffaut aimed for the world where no one goes hungry and no one sheds tears. In his autobiography, in his very first chapter, he was talking about this world, right, where no one goes hungry, means starvation is resolved, and no one sheds tears, meaning unification or no conflict, right, is resolved, is achieved, right? So, and he considered the greatest physical problems of the world to be the food problem, pollution, and environmental protection. So he did list these 3 specifically in the autobiography as the 3 greatest challenges, right? So in his words, he said the 3 greatest challenges of modern society are solving pollution problems, creating a consciousness for protecting the environment, basically sustainability, right? And increasing food production. So these 3 things he listed, and among the 3, Truffaut considered the food problem to be the most urgent. So in his words, right, he's gone through around the world, and then the most urgent problem of the world is the food hunger problem, he said, right? So, here, when I look at the world situation, I feel that securing sufficient food supplies is the most pressing problem. Solving the food crisis cannot be put off even for a moment. And because of the Ukraine issue and many other parts of the world, we're experiencing severe worsening of the hunger issue right now, right in front of our eyes right now. So we cannot be, and he said, we cannot afford to be apathetic just because we and our immediate families are not facing hunger. So he clearly wanted us to care about the world, right? Even though I'm okay, I have food right now and I can feed my kids, but we shouldn't just be happy with that, right? That's what your father is kind of imploring us with, right? So in terms of external problems of the world amplifying the internal problems. This is almost like a DP, right? So why should we be looking at these external issues? Because, why are we why am I talking about all these external stuff, right? Like our movement is more like internal based spiritual movement, right? But why are we talking about this, right? But because the internal issues and the external issues are interrelated. Obviously, right? We all study divine principles, so we all know this. So the external issues are caused by the internal, and vice versa, the external issues amplify and sustain the internal issues. So sorry that this is Japanese data, but I'm going to explain. So example 1, this is basically the kind of pie chart of the reason why somebody attempted suicide. So actually, the health and economic problems are the major motives actually for suicide. So this big one is health, and then this is economy. So these two are actually the major sources of the motives for suicide in today's world. So as seen here, major cause motivation that leads to attempting suicide is related to like external problems, right? Basically money and health. Other issues like family issues, work, relationship issues are also major reasons, but it is clear that money and health, which is like the most external thing, right, that you can think of, seems to be great contributor to suicide, which is interesting, right? I would have thought maybe personal relations or something like that, right, would be a bigger problem here, but the statistics shows that actually health and economic problems actually makes people want to commit suicide, which is interesting. And so, as we said before, internal and external issues interrelate to each other, and then they amplify, right? Each other, right? So kind of like in give and take action. So then they must be resolved basically both, right? They both have to be resolved simultaneously, right? So internal problems are kind of like mental problems or ideological problems, and the external problems are like health issues, financial issues, or environmental issues that we see. Even environmental issues, really affect our mental state, right? So this kind of thing exists as a reality in this world. So in addition, we can see other examples of external issues amplifying the internal mental ideological issues. So as an example, financial disparities have prompted the rise of socialism and communism. So what that means is that, a lot of young people today actually support the idea of socialism, especially like places like in America. If you interview like the younger the generation, the higher amount of people actually approve socialism. This is because they can really clearly see the inequality in our society. The mega rich become mega rich even more, and then the poor people like stay poor or get worse, right? So this kind of thing is prompting people for socialism and communism and things like that to become more popular. So that's an ideological problem, right? Prompted by an external issue. Another example, family finances and external situations affect the atmosphere inside the family and in turn affect the mental state of the children. So this is really relatable, right? Imagine like your parents are having money problems, right? And the kids, of course, feel that. And then it, of course, affects the mental state of the children. So that is a clear also example of this kind of action, right? So in the end, unless the internal and external problems are resolved together, a complete resolution won't be reached. That's sort of the conclusion that we can reach here. In autobiography, True Father said, human beings are created so that their mind and body become one. Something similar is true for the world we live in. The world can be completely united only when there is both physical communication and communication apart. So he's saying, we can really call the world united only when the physical and the internal is resolved. So everybody probably knows this thing, right? SDGs, right? Sustainable Development Goals brought up by the United Nations. So these are some of the various issues of the world that everybody agrees that needs work, right? So world's problems don't only consist of just poverty, hunger. You know, we always talk about poverty, hunger, refugees, and climate change in the Ocean Providence issues, but actually there are many other things that are also happening, right? So the SDGs advocated by the United Nations present the 17 items. Sorry, I didn't swap them with English versions, but you know, right? You can Google it. So 17 items to improve the world. So we might not readily agree with all of their policies, right? You know, they're kind of attempting to resolve all these with specific policies, right? So we don't have to agree with all of them, but in order to understand the state of today's world, right, we should be looking at these, what the world's great powers are trying to resolve, right? So let's look at some of the tendencies of the world today. Okay, so first one is poverty, right? SDG 1 is actually end poverty, and the SDG was created with the target date of 2030, I think, right? Every single target says 2030, I think. So SDG 1 is end poverty by 2030. But the thing is, if we actually look at the statistics, right? According to the 2019 report, poverty was 8.6%, and by 2030, it's projected to be 6%. So they wanted to actually completely eradicate, poverty by 2030, and thought it was possible, but it is now projected that it's going to not happen. But due to and then 2 years later, right, because the COVID happened, 2021 report said due to COVID-19 pandemic, extreme poverty saw increase for the first time in the past decade. So 119 to 124 million people fell into not just poverty, but extreme poverty. So the outlook looks even worse because of these things happening like COVID-19. And then, wars and conflicts in unexpected parts of the world actually make it even worse. So the target probably is even further now, by 2030. So that is the poverty situation. And then number 2 is actually hunger, right? And hunger by 2030. So what is happening in that field, right? So in the 2019 report, between the years 2015 and 2017, starving population increased. Actually, it was going down steadily. So everybody was like, yes, we can probably maybe do it by 2030 at this rate, right? But sadly, from here, it actually gradually like kind of became stagnant and then started going up. And increased from 784 million to 821 million people starving in the world at once. And then 2 years later, after the COVID hit, right, 2021 report says within the year 2020, estimated 70 to 160 million new people experienced hunger. So it's like, basically rapidly getting worse at the moment. Okay, so those are some of the things, some of the major things, and then we can look at a couple other things. So let's see. The goal 6 is safe water and sanitation for all humanity, right? Safe water and sanitation. So in 2019 report, 785 million people still don't receive basic drinking water service. Basically, they don't have drinking water. This amount of people in the world. And then this amount of people, 678 million people, basically that's 9% of the world's population. 1 in 10 people have no access to like flushing bathrooms, basically, right? They just go outside, So this is happening right now in the world. And 2021 report says billions not able to secure drinking water, which means it got worse, right? And sanitation, which means bathroom, right? So at the same time, natural wetlands reduced because of the change in the overall climate of the world. The wetlands are being reduced by 35%, which means water content of the world, right? So maybe hunger and starvation will get worse as well because those things are all interrelated, right? So okay, so number 6 is also getting worse. Number 10, the goal number 10 is reduce inequality within and among countries. So within the country, there are a lot of inequality, and then among countries too, right? If you compare America and some African country or something like that, right? It's completely unequal. So reduce that by 2030, that was the goal. So in 2019, the report says increasing nations recording larger income proportions for the wealthiest top 1%. What that means is that actually the top 1% of each country just earned more, so they took more bigger part of the pie as opposed to the rest of the population. And the poorest 40% earn less than the 25% of the whole pie. So almost half of the people all together earn just 1/4 of the kind of the income that is earned in a country. So that was 2019 report. And then last year, right, there were globally 311 refugees for every 100,000 people. So that's 2020's statistic. And the pandemic is expected to increase the Gini coefficient in emerging and developing countries by 6%. So I'm assuming it's this one, the refugee count per 100,000 people will increase even more. So that is basically inequality, right? Is getting worse and worse. Okay, so number 13, the 13th goal actually was take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts by 2030. So in 2019 report, the average global temperature in 2018 was 1 Celsius higher than before the Industrial Revolution. The death toll from climate and geophysical disasters has reached 1.3 million within these years. So what this is that like in this world today, there's always been basically natural disasters, right? But it is getting worse and worse because of the kind of the speed in which the climate is changing right now. And so more and more natural disasters are happening, and more people are falling victim to this at the moment, right? And then SDG 2021 report says the average global temperature in 2020 will exceed the pre-industrial temperature by 1.2. So basically it is increasing. And then there is no prospect of keeping the temperature under 1.5 Celsius required by the Paris Agreement. So basically there's no prospect, there's no plan, there's probably, it's impossible, right? They're saying it's basically impossible to stop the temperature change. So basically, all these goals were established, right, to do this by 2030, but the current state of the world, it's not looking good at all, right? So when we look at actually SDG 14 is an interesting one. It says conserve and sustainably use the oceans. If you read the news, right, the oceans and its environment is getting worse and worse in the recent years. We see a lot of kind of bad news, right, in terms of oceans. But this is kind of like the plastic, which countries, released more plastic into the ocean, right? Of course, China, but America also is contributing a lot, right? And then ocean acidification increased by about 26% compared to the pre-industrial revolution. And then 33% of fish stocks are deemed not sustainable, which means 1/3 of the fish stocks means like, renewing, right? Like they have babies and they're gonna keep their population up. But 1/3 of the fish are basically, their prospect is to just die out, and so at the moment, right? Like if we go forward with our current, what we're doing. And the number of dead zones increased from 400 to 700 from within these years, just in 10 years. So this goal also is in shambles, not doing good, Okay, so this is kind of like to show you the refugee situation. The evacuated means they got displaced by something, right? Civil war or some sort of disastrous event that happened in their country, and so they got displaced and went somewhere, right? So the evacuated refugees worldwide increased from 2 million to whopping 30 million in these years. So this figure shows the refugee counts during the 7 years between these 2 years, right? So the number of refugees more than doubled from 15 million in 2011 to 30 million in 2020. So just within the last decade, half of that 30 million was in the last decade. So the number of refugees seemed to decrease a little after the end of the Cold War around 1990, but it started to increase again. Venezuela, with its economic problems, as we all know, and Syria, Palestine, Afghanistan, with their conflict, are continuing to produce refugees. And of course, the Ukraine situation produced millions more refugees as well. So these refugees continue to enter USA and Europe, right, causing racial tensions to rise. So this is happening at the moment right now, right? So climate refugees also is very likely, according to Forbes. So these climate refugees means natural disasters or the place where they're living right now will go underwater or something, right? And becomes unlivable. And so they have to go somewhere else, right? So this kind of thing is projected to become 1.2 billion, right, by 2050. In this photo, it's estimated that 17% of Bangladesh's landmass will be submerged by the sea level rise by 2050. So the 20 million people who are there will basically lose their homes. Like they know for sure that that's going to happen at the moment. So the Australian think tank IEP predicts that by 2050, at least 1.2 billion, right? It's not a million, 1.2 billion people. That's like, well, 1/8, right? 1/7 of the world's population, right? So about 15% of today's world's population could be evacuated by climate-related events. So just the climate, right, which is basically unstoppable according to the UN, right? So it's going to happen, right? This is going to happen. And then in April 2021, the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees released data that showed the number of people displaced by the climate-related disasters has risen to 21.5 million at the moment since 2010. It pointed out that sudden disasters also cause rise in food and water shortages and difficulty in accessing the natural resources. So of course, the refugee problem is closely tied to the hunger problem as well, right? The hunger problem is basically interconnected with every other issue almost, if you really look at it. So that's why hunger is kind of at the crux of everything. It is interconnected in a big, huge knot. And so this is also the reality of today's world. So the rising sea levels caused by the climate change is also a major threat. 90% of people who live at the coastal areas that are at risk of rising seawater are from poor developing or small developing island nations. So across the world, right, a lot of people live near the water, right, for convenience or something like that. But whopping 90% of people are actually poor population, not like a resort, with a rich person at the resort at like an island by the sea, right? That's a very tiny part of the population that lives by the sea. Actually, 90% of the people are actually in the developing nations or island nations and are poor, and they are going to be displaced. Okay, so we've been talking about a lot of these, current world issues, external issues, right? And then I've been saying that the various problems of the world are interconnected, right? So Truffaut's words, the 3 greatest challenges of modern society are solving pollution problems, creating a consciousness for protecting the environment, and increasing food production. So that's what he said. So for example, pollution to ocean or land advances the climate change. It basically makes it go faster, right? And then food production is reduced in dirty oceans and on land. So climate change also causes food and water shortage, right? So it's interconnected to food problem. But someone has to feed the overflowing refugees in some way, right? So countries around the world should be working together on this problem. Like it's not just refugee problem, like quote unquote. It's going to be a hunger problem, right? And one person or one nation can't actually resolve this, right? And so countries around the world should be working together, but there are increasing nationalistic sentiments coming up from many parts of Europe or USA, and it's very difficult to establish a corporate cooperative system that or policy against various issues like climate change at the moment, because this issue is supercharged with politics right now, right? So at this rate, the future that awaits the youth of today might be an era of hopeless suffering around the world. We see so many unbelievable news, right? Every single day we turn on the news or go on Twitter or something, and we see like something new that's unbelievable that's happening in the world. And then this just gonna continue happening, and then what's that going to do to our youth's mental state, right? So the psychological state of the world. So the issues of the world affect the mental state of the adults, right? First of all, the adults of the world. And in turn, this affects the mental state of children in their homes and in the society, and who are connected to the internet and watching these on the peripheral of the news and things. They're probably not watching the CNN news or like Fox News or anything like that, but they probably get the information from SNS, right? So as mentioned before, the situation in the world is critical, with conflicts and refugees and hunger and things like that projected to actually all at the same time increase. So people held high hopes for UN's SDG efforts, but the world situation does not seem to have improved much. And it looks like there is not much hope, right? If we just look at these statistics. So what is the overall mental state of the world in such a current situation, right? What is actually the overall mental state? Okay, so some more charts. I like charts, but I don't know if you like charts, but let's look at some of these graphs. Okay, so mental state of the world, according to this, 115 countries. Okay, so the question is, did you feel stress yesterday, right? Were you stressed out yesterday? And if somebody asks me that question, I'll be like, yeah, mildly, So I think basically a lot of people are stressed, right? So the stress level is highest recorded ever in the history of humankind. And then the mental state of the world also, the negative experience index. So the question is, did you experience some kind of negative emotions or something like that, right? So if you look at the bottom here, did you experience stress yesterday? And 40% of the people said yes. That's almost half, right? Did you worry about something? And then a lot of people said yes. Did you experience a physical pain, right? Physical pain yesterday. That's 30%. That's a lot, right? And did you experience sadness yesterday? 27%, that's almost like 1/3 also. And did you experience anger yesterday, right? So all these things are negative experience index is very, very high as well. And the negative emotion, right? So it's like worry, stress, physical pain, right? Sadness, anger. So all these things are going up. And I think this is the overall negative emotion index, the yellow one in the middle. And also, so death of despair, right, is also highest ever recorded in the United States as well. So what these are is that, so death of despair, suicide, alcohol-related death, drugs are going up. Suicide was very high here, huh? Interesting. It's gradually going up now, but death of despair is like shooting up like a crazy, right? So, and then if we look at the collapse of sexual morality in the Christian nation, which is USA. So USA is like a representative Christian cultural realm, right? So basically in this country, United States, the sexual morality has basically has been reaching a point where it's like just rolling off the cliff, and if you look at the support of the same-sex marriage, basically, family values type of thing, right? This is a very representative statistics. 67% of the people validates the same-sex marriage. This is a complex topic, but basically it is kind of a representation of traditional family values disintegrating, basically, right, in a place like America, which is supposed to be this Christian cultural realm. And also the actual people who self-identify as LGBT, basically not like a regular straight or heterosexual. They either say they're lesbian or gay or bisexual or transgender or some other form of something, right? This is also becoming 7.1% overall. If we actually look at each age group, the youngest generation has records like, I think, such a high number, like 20 something percent. So that is this is also going up, and is very alarming to see for some people, right? So this is kind of what's happening in the world today in terms of like overall mental state, looking at these graphs. So what is then the mental state of the youth that live in such a world, right? So the world's problems affect the mental state of the adults, obviously, right? And the resulting environment affects the children in the home, right? Or children who are looking at the SNS, right? Their mental state gets deeply affected by what's happening in the world and the mental state of the adults around them. So when we investigate the world's mental state, the recorded number of people reporting to feel anger, stress, sadness, and other similar like negative emotions have hit the all-time high, according to Gallup polls. So in addition, in a modern society with its excessive liberalism, right, sexual morality is breaking down, taking with it the long-term framework of raising a healthy child's mind in like a healthy family. So that is also breaking down. So in this kind of environment, what do you think, right? What do you think is the mental state of a general youth in today's society in a developed nation like the United States? So let's look at the situation of specifically of America's youth, where it represents the world as kind of the melting pot of races, right? In these three categories. So number one, suicide. Number two, sexual immorality. And number three, psychological tendencies. So let's look at these three things real quick. Okay, so America's youth suicide is skyrocketing in young people today. So number of suicide for youths 10, can you believe 10, right? 10 to 24 years old. Even before the 2020 pandemic, depression and anxiety was a serious issue in the United States, with a 60% increase in suicides for the age group between 10 and 24. Like the young people, the ones that we are putting our hopes in, right? In the years between 2009 and 2017. So according to the CDC's research of high schoolers in 2017, 37% of them, 37% of the high schoolers felt continuous sadness and hopelessness. That is something is completely affecting their mental state, right? As we were saying before. And then 17% seriously considered suicide, and then 14% actually planned to do it, and 7% attempted suicide. So that is the number in 2017 in high schoolers in America. So I didn't know this, and that is, I totally didn't think the number was this high, which is 7% is like, that is crazy, attempting suicide. And when we look at, so that was suicide, and when we look at the sexual morality breaking down in the United States, right? So when we look at the population that identify as LGBT or similar something else, right? Really, if we break it down by age group, the Gen Z, right? The youngest age group, actually a whopping 20%, 1/5 of the people, they say they are some sort of LGBT. So they self-identify as this, 20% of them, and that is super, almost very shocking. So this breakdown of sexual morality, basically it's sort of a extreme liberalism, right? No traditional sense of sexual morality is retained if we look at this number, right? So, so the breakdown of sexual morality is happening here in North America, the representative Christian cultural nation of the world, this culture has spread throughout the Western culture as well. So in this kind of environment, right, all the youths, right, have no choice but to be affected, I mean, I see my daughters, right? I mean, teenage daughters, many friends are in this group, right? They identify as LGBT. Like, if it's 1/5 of the population in their age group, of course, right? They're friends. They are friends with them, and it was not like that when I was growing up. So it's a very shocking reality of how fast the increase in this number was in today's world. And then we're going to look at this loss of empathy. So a lot of young people today kind of worry about themselves excessively, almost like a narcissistic tendency, right? And have no empathy towards other people. Loss of compassion is being recorded as a mental state of the youth today. So first of all, what is empathy, right? It's also called the compassion, the heart of compassion. So it's an emotion that triggers the action to help others in need, right? When you are a compassionate person, if you see somebody that needs help, your body almost moves automatically and say, oh my gosh, are you okay? So that is empathy, right? And they're saying that it is decreasing in today's youth. So in the United States, a survey of 13,737 college students from 1979 to 2009 showed that 48% of college students have lost the ability to empathize in the last 30 years, within these 30 years. So 2009 is actually like a long time ago, 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. So the reasons given in this survey, right? So what is the reason that 50% of the students have completely lost the ability to empathize? What's the reason? What could the reason be? So in that survey, they pointed to the fact that it's due to cultural materialism. I should be able to earn money easily, and whatever I own is basically the representation of me type of thing, right? The cultural materialism. And then some sort of method of family education. So it says optimistic education. I guess it's sort of like, it's the type of education where like you do you're perfect as you are type of, probably that's what they mean by that. And also the tendency of echo chambers. So you guys probably know this key phrase, right, of today. So it's tendency to interact only with people who have the same idea, because SNS and things like that are kind of completely like made efficient towards doing that, right? Like they only suggest things that you like, right? So there's a tendency to interact only with people who basically agree with you, and so there's no exchange of different ideas. So in addition, it seems that the tendency for youth to love themselves in current Western nations is so strong, like just I'm the most important person right now, right? I should just worry about myself, right? So that is so strong that it is now called the narcissism epidemic. So that is very concerning as well. So empathy going down and self-love going up. If you just put it like this, it doesn't look good, right? It does not look good. Especially for us who know about the divine principle and living for the sake of others, right? Culture of living for the sake of others. So to summarize the situation of the current world and our youths, right? Various issues of the world are getting worse in many aspects, as we saw in many of the statistics, right? And in terms of the overall mental state, we continue to see increasing anger and stress in a lot of people. And inevitably, sensitive young people, right? When we're young, we are easily affected, influenced, right? And so sensitive young people are ending up inheriting this overall world's mental state through SNS and within the family and from the adults and so on. So at the same time, materialism and excessive liberalism are being promoted, heavily promoted by the media in today's world. So it seems that environmentalism and others are becoming popular at the same time, right? Among youths, it seems like a lot of youth are concerned about the environment and these things a little bit, right? It seems that way, but in an overall sense, youth are becoming more and more materialistic and less empathetic towards others in general. So the issues of the world must eventually be inherited by and solved by our current youth, right? Current youth who are like that, but we seem to be stuck in a vicious cycle, and the world's issues are showing tendencies to become worse. So this is just the overall tendency of today's youth, right, in this world right now, right? So the world issues, as we saw today in the SDGs and some of the statistics that we saw earlier, we are, clearly some of the tendencies of the world, physical tendencies of the world, are getting worse for sure. And then this will affect the mental state even more. So anger and stress and sadness are at all-time high right now. And, if it just continues this way, it's probably going to get worse, right? We can kind of guess if we don't do anything about it, of course, right? And then the world's mental state, of course, is affecting the youth's mental state, right? All of our mental states, and especially the young, impressionable youths. So this kind of sadness or hopelessness and loss of empathy really doesn't sound good, right? We love our youth and we want them to have great vision, big dreams, right? And big compassion and like hope to save the world and things like that. But the general tendency of the world is like this, which is very sad to see. And then this kind of thing becomes a vicious cycle, and things could get worse and worse. So, we just looked at the realistic problems of the world, like just the real world problems. So as the state of the world and our youth are not in a good shape, right? Not in good shape. So let's turn to how True Father thought about today's youth. So what did he say, right? What did he say about youth of today? Okay, so in his autobiography, he said, it's difficult to find young people today who are passionate about their lives. We find so many young people who, with no goal or purpose for their life, are just wandering around. All great leaders in history had a definite sense of purpose in life from the time they were children. From childhood, they nurtured that purpose held within their hearts and exerted great energy to achieve it. Whether they were sleeping or playing with their friends, every youthful action of these great leaders was geared toward preparing for the stage that they would stand on in the future. Is that how you are living your life? So this is True Father asking us, right? Is this how you're living your life? Do you have this big, huge goal from when you were little, right? And then you are getting ready, preparing for the stage where you're actually going to jump right into that, right? So he's saying, are you living your life in that way? And in the beginning of that quote, we could see that he was worried about today's youth, right? And then he continued and said that there is, however, something more important than studying to prepare for the future. Before unconditionally focusing entirely on studies, young people must realize what they want to do in life. They must make a determination to use their talents to help the world rather than just serve themselves. Many young people today seem to be studying just for its own sake. Unless you have a purpose in your life, your studies will lack the passion needed for happiness. Once I came across a Korean student working hard for his English schoolwork. I asked him, why are you working so hard to learn English? He answered, to get into a university. What could be more foolish? Getting into a university is not a purpose. A university is a place to go to study particular subjects in the course of pursuing a larger objective. It cannot be the objective itself. Also, do not define your life goal in terms of how much money you want to make. So obviously, True Father wants young people to have big dreams and then pursue it by preparing, right? So, going to school or something like that cannot be, or making money, that cannot be the objective, he said, right? It has to happen in the course of pursuing a much larger objective. So True Father seems to have been thinking the recent youth have no passion, they have no purpose in life and kind of wandering around. That's in his words, right? That he said. And he said that your aim shouldn't be to make money or enter a good university. That shouldn't be the goal, right? That shouldn't be the end goal, or even to live just a good enough life or something like that. So how did your father think you should live, right? How did he actually think? You know. So the section 2, in his autobiography, True Father asks the youth to become global leaders. So that's the word he uses, right? Global leaders. So what is a quote unquote global leader that your father hoped for? So you might be thinking, global leader, wow, that means like a world leader? Like there's no way I can become someone like that, right? How am I supposed to become like suddenly, global leader? Like what is that, right? But, that's probably not what he meant, So according to your father, you already possess great potential if you were already interested in the world and want to do something for the world. So, there, if you already care about the world, that is potential enough in your father's mind, right? So let's take a look at his words in his autobiography a little bit more about what kind of people he wanted young people to be. Okay, so number one, he wanted young people to have the will to solve the problems of the world. So let's see what he said. So when you're setting your goal, be sure to consider the entire world, right? So consider Africa, which continues to suffer from poverty and disease. Consider Israel and Palestine, where people continue to aim their weapons at each other and fight over matters of religion. Consider Afghanistan, where people barely keep themselves alive by raising poppy plants used to make harmful drugs. Consider the United States, which has thrown the world's economy into a pit with its extreme greed and selfishness. Consider Indonesia, which suffers from continued earthquake and tidal waves. So he's saying when you're trying to make a goal for yourself, first consider the entire world, right? World. And then he said, imagine yourself in the context of those countries and think which country and which situation would be most appropriate for you. It may be that you are best suited to India, where a new religious conflict may erupt. Or it could be Rwanda, which languishes in drought and hunger. Please think beyond your own country and think of the world as your stage in setting your goal. So he wanted us, right, to consider the world as our stage, right? Not just like this, city that I live in or something like that, right? And then number two, he wanted those who consider the problems of the world as their own problems. Okay, so let's read what he said. The phrase global leader is now in vogue in Korea. People say they want to become fluent in English and become global leaders. Becoming a global leader, however, is not a matter of a person's fluency in English. The ability to communicate in English is nothing more than a tool. A true global leader is someone who is able to embrace the world in his own bosom. A person who has no interest in the problems of the world cannot become a global leader, no matter how well he might communicate in English. To be a global leader, a person must think of the world's problems as his own and have the pioneering spirit that is needed to finding difficult solutions. A person who's attached to a secure and fixed income or dreams of having a pension after retirement and comfortable family life cannot be a global leader. So, here he's kind of explaining to us what kind of person is a global leader, right? So it's not actual world leader or politician, right? He's more talking about the internal aspects, kind of the heart within us, right? How we are holding ourselves in our hearts. And then number three, he wanted a person who loves the world as his own family. So what did he say about that? He said, to become a global leader, a person must consider the whole world to be his country and all humanity to be his brothers and sisters and not be overly concerned that he does not know what the future may hold for him. So, I don't know what's going to happen to me tomorrow, but, I want to be concerned about the whole world, right? As my own place, right? So love among siblings means that one sibling is willing to go hungry if necessary so that his brother or sister can eat. A global leader is someone who loves humanity as he loves his own family, right? So of course, as a mother, I'm willing to go hungry, of course, right? If it meant I can feed my children, but he wants me to become a person who is willing to go hungry for someone across the world, Okay, so and then number 4, he wanted us to have interest and compassion for our neighbors. So what did he say about that? He said, there's no quick fix to the problem of the world hunger. People in each country have different tastes for food and different customs, and the plants and animals are different. The important point is concern for our neighbors. We first need to develop the heart that when we are eating enough to fill our own stomachs, we think of others who are going hungry and consider how we can help them. True peace will not come as long as humanity does not solve the problem of hunger. If the person next to me is about to die of hunger, peace is a mere luxury. So in these words, you can see, right? True Father is kind of telling us, right? Our spiritual movement, or Christians, or a religion, right? We can preach peace as much as we want, but if somebody's going hungry right in front of me, no matter how much how much I preach about peace, right, it's not going to reach his ears, right? And so peace is just a luxury, right? Like, what are you talking about? They're gonna say, what are you talking about? I'm not even in that situation where I can even consider that yet, right? So peace can become a mere luxury, he's saying. So if we summarize the characteristics of a global leader according to True Father's words in his autobiography, let's see. Number 1, a person who loves to solve problems of the world, hopes to solve problems of the world, right? He said, when you're setting your goals, you gotta consider the whole world and then set your goal. And then number 2, he said, somebody who considers world's problems to be their own. I can feel the problems of the world as if it's my own problem. And then number 3, who loves humanity as their own brothers and sisters, right? I'm willing to, sacrifice myself, or, become a pioneer in order to go help these people. And number 4, who has an interest in and compassion for the entire humankind. So first of all, at least we need to be interested in what's going on, what kind of suffering is happening in the world, not just, kind of blindly thinking of what's right, or what we should believe, or things like that. We should actually clearly understand today's world and have compassion for humankind, who is suffering from all these external problems as well as internal problems. So then in turn, right, we can actually, from this, we can actually see who is not suited to become a global leader as well, right? So let's see who is not suited for that. So somebody who's not interested at all in world's problems. So, so we should at least be interested in what is happening in the world today. Or somebody who's attached to secure and fixed income. So that's very relatable, right? We all want a secure and fixed income, right? But if we put too much importance on that, then that's not who True Father wants, right? So we have to be careful about that. And then somebody who's dreaming of having a pension after retirement and a comfortable family life, right? That's also relatable, but of course you shouldn't, this shouldn't be the goal of a life, right? True parents want us to have big dreams to do something for the entire world, right? Or somewhere in the world, not just like within my own family. If I'm happy, then that's fine, So rather than living to achieve our own peaceful lives, somewhere in a nice place like America or something like that, he wants us to become a person who is interested in and compassionate about the suffering of the mankind, and feel it as our own problems. So the current situation, we talked about the lack of situation in the lack of compassion in youth, right? In developed nations. So youth who grew up in the developed nations, generally were kind of, it completely separated from the rest of the world in terms of like, actually majority of the world is struggling to put food on their table for dinner today, Oh my gosh, what should I do about tomorrow's food? I don't think I can feed my kids tomorrow, That is kind of the majority of the people's situation, right? But here in America, right, we're thinking like, oh yeah, Bitcoin, or like Dogecoin or something like that. How can I earn money more easily? Oh my gosh, my life sucks. What can I do to make it more comfortable or something like that, right? So there's a complete disconnect between the developed nations and the developing nations. And that is kind of the current situation. So it's difficult to live for world peace without first feeling the depth of world's problems as our own. Therefore, we must first teach ourselves to have compassion, right? It's actually, it doesn't come naturally. Even I'm thinking about like hunger or like poverty and things like that. It's really like takes a mental training to really care about that, you know? So therefore, right, we must first teach ourselves to have compassion as an important first step towards the world of world peace. Okay, so lastly, True Father wants us to become these global leaders, right? In parentheses. So in order to truly reach the peaceful world we are aiming for. So in addition, True Father had continuously declared that we have now entered the ocean era. So what's the global leader True Father hopes for in this new thing called ocean era, right? So we know what a global leader is in general, but what is a global leader for the ocean era that he repeatedly declared, right? So True Father wants us to become the global leaders who considers and actually solves world problems in various fields. So, you know, various fields, like study fields, right? Or issues of the world. So then what kind of leaders were needed for the ocean where he invested unimaginable time into? So first step as a global leader of the ocean era, it's a person who's united with the deep feelings and perspectives of true parents who mourn the suffering of humankind. So, you know, he said, the problems of the world aren't so important to you. There are situations today in some countries where millions and millions of people are starving. Can you understand that? No, you can't understand that. What I have to do is connect to the better side of this world to the spiritual world. And then I have to turn my eyes down into the deepest hell, and I have to pay attention to the most miserable situations. I have to solve that whole thing. So he knew, right? It's hard for us to actually care for the starving people. He's like, no, you don't even understand, you know? But he's saying, I have to actually, as a parent of humankind, I'm looking at the most miserable situations, right? So, you know, he said most miserable situations. So God's perspective and true parents' perspective, right, as the parent of humankind, of course, is looking at the most miserable situation. We're all his children. So of course, the most suffering ones are the ones they really have to look at, right? Their eyes are going towards there, right? And we must unite with that heart. So true parents, right, as the parents of humankind, of course, can't rest until all of their children are saved, right? Internally and externally. So their eyes and hearts are with the most miserable situations in the world. So in order to unite with your parents' heart and perspective, ocean era leaders must deeply think about humanity's hunger problem, right? This is interconnected with all the other problems of the world. And so this, you know, which is the suffering of our brothers and sisters across the world. And we need to connect to that heart. And in autobiography, your father said, catching fish is not a pleasure cruise. No matter how many fish may be in the ocean, they are not going to just jump into the boat. It takes specialized knowledge and much experience. A person must know how to mend a net and how to tie an anchor rope. Once a person receives intense training to become a fisherman, he can go anywhere in the world and become a leader of people. So he's saying, you know, if you're trained in this way, trained on the ocean, you can actually go anywhere in the world and become a leader, right? So learning to become a fisherman is good leadership training. And then he also said, the ocean has everything to do with the future. Don't you know that? You have to become interested in the ocean, or otherwise you will just disappear into history. In the future, the qualification for leadership will be to know about the ocean. And the basic knowledge will be to how to handle a boat. To know about the ocean and to be able to go upon it will become the two basic qualifications for leadership in the future. So his expectation is that every leader, right, should know and be interested in the ocean, know about and interested in the ocean. And then he also said, young people should develop an interest in the ocean. Someone who can take responsibility for projects in the ocean must emerge among you who are here. The reason I go out to the Atlantic Ocean and stay there for 24 hours is to establish a tradition of having loved the ocean. So he's saying he's actually just establishing this tradition, right? By ceaselessly going out to the ocean, showing us that it's actually important, using his own body, right? Using his own body as a proof, you know? So that's why in the future, he said, we should become a leading force in the maritime industry. The time will come when you will concentrate your efforts upon the ocean more than the land. That's why I'm taking an interest in the ocean, and that's why you should also take an interest in the ocean. So it's a person who loves and has interest in the ocean, like that, right? And then he also said the future leaders of the world must understand how to keep and preserve the oceans. The time is coming when humankind will invest and devote all its power, cultural identity, traditions, and national resources into developing the riches and treasures that lie at the bottom of the sea. However, the key point is who will be in the commanding position in the ocean areas to pursue that development. So he knows in the future, near future, all the countries in the world will put all their efforts into developing the ocean, right? And then he wanted us at the time to become to reach a commanding position when that happened, right? And then he's looking for man of vision and courage. Actually, God is looking. So he's talking about God, right? Actually, God is looking for a group of people who are organized and committed to meeting that challenge of the ocean. If such a committed group of ocean-loving people can be found, God will give the blessing to them. Those people finally become candidates for lordship over the ocean. They must be thinking with the Creator's mind. As such, courageous people from around the world come together and unite in the common goal, one ideal. That vision must transcend all national and racial boundaries. Once such an international group is set up, it will be very difficult for any single nation to challenge it, for it will truly have a global perspective. Okay. So in summary, right, all these things were like global leader, kind of a leadership, a leader of the oceanic era, right? So in summary, what did he say? He said, first of all, a person who's united with the true heart and perspective of true parents who mourn the suffering of the humankind. So first and foremost, we need to actually put our hearts to the most miserable situations of the world and connect to that heart of true parents and God, right? Which is the hunger problem, and then number two, those, right, who understand the problems of hunger, a person who look towards the most miserable situation of the world. And then number three, a person who go out to the world and overcome any situation. So he said, if you have a good ocean training, it's a good leadership training, and you can actually go out anywhere into the world and become leader of people, right, and overcome any situation. And then he said, number four, he wants a person who knows the ocean and possesses specialized knowledge and abilities. So he actually wanted us to gain some specialized knowledge, right? And also specialized abilities in the field of the ocean, so that we can be more useful in that field, right? And then he also said people who possess love and interest for the ocean. And then he said people who can protect and seize and gain dominion over the oceans, a group of people who can stand in a commanding position, right? When the world shows its interest in the ocean and puts all their effort into it, which is, slowly manifesting right now. And number seven, people who engage in maritime businesses, right? He wanted people who can do all these, marine businesses and be competent in it. And then lastly, he wanted a person with vision and courage, that can challenge the sea, right? Challenging the sea, already that person has vision and courage, right? So we covered in this presentation that the important first step to become the global leaders of the ocean era is to know about the current state of the hunger problem, right? To understand the heart of true parents that really, really reaches out towards the most miserable situations. And then we have to be able to kind of internalize it and consider this situation as our own problem, So in the next presentation, we would like to really focus on the real current state of the world's hunger and the food problem. We're probably going to look at a lot of statistics again. Hopefully you like that kind of stuff. But we really need to know the current state of hunger problem and why it actually warrants our attention. Why should we care, So that is going to be our next focus point in the next webinar. So I thought it would be like an hour long, but it was like hour and 10 minutes long. So it's not too bad. So that is the end of today's webinar.